They came before sunrise, not with ballots or campaign posters, but with petrol cans and whispered orders. Within hours, smoke curled above the hills, and families who had shared tea the week before were now fleeing in opposite directions. Mothers clutched their children, men shouted warnings, and the roads filled with people carrying mattresses, goats, and plastic bags stuffed with whatever they could grab. No one spoke of parties or manifestos. The only question that mattered was, are you one of us or one of them? By nightfall, villages were split along invisible lines, lines not drawn by geography but by blood and ancestry. It wasn't an ancient tribal feud flaring back to life, it was something far colder. A political strategy, sharpened over decades, that turns neighbour against neighbour when the stakes are power. And in Kenya, this strategy has made and broken presidencies, rewritten alliances, and left scars on the land and in the minds of millions. So how did a modern democracy become a place where elections can tear communities apart in hours? To answer that, we have to follow the money, the promises, and the history, right back to the moment this game of identity for power began. December 2007 began like any campaign season. Rallies, chants, posters flapping in the wind. By midnight, however, the results came out contested, accusations flew, and the calm gave way to chaos. Riots, organized attacks, and reprisal killings spread along lines that looked disturbingly familiar. Maps of ethnic settlement overlapped almost exactly with maps of where the worst violence happened. Over 1,000 people were killed and hundreds of thousands were forced from their homes. The state and party networks were not neutral. They were part of the machinery that turned political dispute into ethnic cleansing. That destruction forced an accounting. A commission, the Wacky Commission, later laid out how political leaders used local networks to mobilize violence. It named names, charted the flows of money and weapons, and concluded that the rot ran deep. But this wasn't some throwback to tribal warfare. It was modern politics weaponizing identity, a technique as old as patronage and as new as WhatsApp. And the question became, how do you build a nation when votes are counted like tribal head counts? Keep watching, because the answer lives inside a pattern that's repeated every 5 years. People often talk about tribe as if it's an emotion, and it is. But it's also logistics and incentives. Politicians learn early that votes are easiest to win when you line up communities that will reliably turn out for you. Neighborhoods where families are related, where church and clan leaders speak the same language. These are predictable vote banks. Surveys and research from the election periods around 2007 show a clear pattern. Ethnicity strongly correlates with voting behavior, even when voters claim other priorities, so candidates do two things. One, they promise public goods, roads, water, jobs, but with a twist. Those goods often flow first to areas where the candidate's friends and relatives live. Two, they hire local brokers, chiefs, business people, militia leaders, who can turn influence into turnout. Over time, this creates a cycle. Politicians fund patronage, patrons deliver people, the people expect payback. That loop keeps tribal loyalties politically useful. But how does a country escape that loop? Hang on, there's a political experiment that tried to do exactly that, and it produced a surprising result. To understand modern tribal politics, you have to travel further back, to how the colonial state parceled land, created labor markets, and wrote divisions into law. Colonial policies often confined one group to certain reserves and privileged another for cash crop areas or commerce. Those divisions hardened into grievances: who had the most land, who got the jobs, who was inside the power circle, and who was left out. Those historic inequalities mean that when a leader promises security or land or jobs, people hear it as a promise to their family network. It's intimate, immediate, and dangerously effective. Still, the story isn't only about anger. It's about fear, too, fear of being permanently excluded, which leads us to the next section, the people who build careers out of playing ethnic fears like a violin. Some politicians are explicit. They appeal first to their own ethnic base and then try to expand outward. Others try to stitch fragile coalitions across groups. The handshake in 2018 between two heavyweight leaders, a public coming together that stunned observers, showed both the danger and the possibility of breaking those patterns. Political rivals negotiated identity politics into a deal that reshaped alliances nationwide. But even that moment of détente was also a reminder. Deals between elites can sidestep ordinary citizens' needs and reshape where patronage flows. At every election, candidates hedge. They promise unity in speeches, then reward loyalists in appointments, contracts, and development projects. That's not a conspiracy so much as a political equilibrium. Why wouldn't a leader use the most dependable way to win and govern? The real cost shows up in the long tail, when whole communities are left without services because they were not on the right list. The next section follows the human cost of that choice. Names on official reports become people in the pages of court filings and in the interviews of survivors. Displaced families who lost land, farmers who watched crops burn, women who suffered violence. These are the ordinary outcomes of ethnicized politics. Human rights organizations documented sexual violence, houses torched, and communities fractured after election-related violence. These are not abstractions. They are the ruptured lives that rebuild slowly, often never fully. This damage reconfigures social trust. Neighbors become strangers overnight, and that social tear makes future reconciliation harder. And when things are this broken, some people double down on identity as protection, believing tribe will be the umbrella that shields them from marginalization. That psychological feedback makes ethnically based politics self-reinforcing. But there's another force now altering the calculation. New media. Wait until you hear how a phone in every pocket changed the rules of the game. The same platform that lets farmers sell produce now lets rumors travel faster than truth. WhatsApp groups, TikTok clips, and viral memes create instant narratives. Who was attacked? Who is to blame? Which community is on the move? These networks can be used for help and coordination, or to inflame suspicion and mobilize violence in hours. Researchers and journalists have pointed to the explosive role of social platforms in spreading ethnically charged misinformation, making local disputes national crises in a single forwarded message. At the same time, a new generation of activists has used digital tools to organize beyond tribal lines. National protests led by young people who refuse to be boxed into ethnic identity. Those protests reveal a fragile but growing possibility that shared urban grievances might be a way out of tribal politics. But the path is steep, and elites with patronage to protect often push back hard. The next section looks at reform efforts and why change is so difficult. After 2007, commissions and courts attempted to set new rules. The Waki report recommended prosecutions and reforms. Kenya retooled parts of its constitution and electoral bodies to make fraud harder and to increase oversight. Those changes mattered. They reduced some of the most visible manipulations and gave civil society tools to demand accountability. But institutions can only go so far when patronage networks are intact. Powerful actors adapt, they find new channels to distribute rewards, or they work around the rules with legalistic strategies. So reform helps, but it does not erase the incentives that make ethnic politics work. That leaves us with a sobering conclusion. The legal architecture can blunt the worst abuses, but political culture and economic inequality feed the machine. Which brings us to the final section. What might actually break the cycle? There are reasons for guarded hope. In recent elections, we saw candidates try new strategies, building coalitions that cut across traditional lines and courting urban voters whose concerns are more about jobs and housing than clan ties. Economic shifts, migration to cities, a rising middle class, and the spread of information make vote buying and narrow tribal appeals less automatic. Research suggests that when voters are better informed and have stronger economic alternatives, they are less likely to vote solely on identity. But those changes are slow, uneven, and contested by powerful interests. Put simply, change is possible, but it won't come from a single handshake or a single law. It will come when communities feel less dependent on patronage and more invested in public goods that serve everyone. That will take time, institutions that deliver fairly, and leaders willing to risk short-term political advantage for long-term nation building, which, as you'll see next, means ordinary people have a central role.
Conclusion: a nation between maps and people. Tribalism in Kenyan politics is not an ancient script replayed on a loop. It is a modern system, a set of incentives, informal networks, and historical wounds that politicians exploit because it works. It costs lives, it saps trust, and it warps promises into favors for friends. Yet the story is not only one of doom. There are signs of a countercurrent, new coalitions, civic activism, and changing economics that could, slowly, shift the balance. The hard truth is this: Fixing the machine requires more than indictments or speeches. It requires rebuilding trust in institutions, reducing economic dependency on political patrons, and giving people alternatives to choosing tribe for safety. That is a long project, but it's not impossible. And for anyone watching now, the most powerful thing you can do is understand the structure of the system, the maps, the incentives, the people who profit, and the small, stubborn ways citizens push back. Because if history taught us anything, it's that when the phone goes off with a forwarded warning at midnight, it's not just a message, it's a choice. And the next time that message arrives, the country will be watching to see what choices people make.